So you may not know the Prince's Countryside Fund. You will probably know our original founder. He tends to be in the spotlight quite a lot of the time, the Prince of Wales. And this was a charity that he wanted to establish to help contribute to essentially family farms. Family farms and rural communities are really important to him, and he wanted to be able to help them when they were facing challenges. And I think we can all see the situation at the moment is one of those times of challenge. So what the fund tries to do is, by giving grants and arranging training, skills training, business training, and so on, the fund tries to help farmers deal with not only the challenges of adapting your business, as we're all finding out about here at this conference, but also getting your business skills in order, thinking about your business plan, how you run your farm, and so on. I've been lucky enough to hear from some of the farmers who've benefited from the fund and have learnt new ways of doing things, and some of them have told me that has been a matter of ensuring their survival, as opposed to not if they hadn't been on that training. So we've been, as part of our work, looking at new entrants as a specific project, and we have carried out some research work with groups who have contributed to our understanding about why some people find it very difficult to get into farming. And I'm sure some of you will be in that same boat, and the challenges will be familiar to you. But what we thought we'd do today is have a panel session with some new entrants, new farmers from different backgrounds, different ways into the industry, and to do a bit of a Q&A with them. And in a minute, I'm going to ask them to, and this is their first test, to speak in a minute only about one or two questions that we've asked them to think about. But if I start off with Chris. Chris farms beef, cattle, lamb and goat in Kent, lived on a family farm until age 12, and then left the farm and became a gas engineer, but was drawn back to farming later in his career. And he came back into farming but didn't any longer have the land, so he has managed to lease some land and has started to develop a flock of his own. So we'll hear from him. We'll hear from Liz Tree, who's a final year BSc agriculture student at Harper Adams University, and is doing her dissertation at the moment into ethnic diversity and inclusivity within the food supply chain. And she comes from South London with no prior connections to farming, and she's now already picked up experience with sheep, pigs, poultry, and fresh produce. She has managed to get some support and some scholarships to help her on her journey, and we'll hear a bit more from her. And then we have Liz King, who works full-time as a project officer for the Prince's Countryside Fund, and has a diverse role working with farmers who of course she understands well, because she grew up on a family farm, and although not full-time on the farm, she supports her brother in his sheep farming enterprise, and she's really passionate about getting young people into agriculture and supporting family farms. So what I'd like to do now is to invite them in turn, perhaps in the order in which I've introduced them, to give you a minute's worth of their views on a series of things, which they'll talk to you about in just a second. So, Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris. You pretty much heard my whole story then, but I started farming, got back into farming about 6 years ago, and have started from scratch, from the bottom, and tried to build a business all the way up to where we're finally at now, which is probably finally a profitable business after 6 years. So that's about it, I think, for me, innit? Most of it you sort of explained, like.
Well, it's profitable. That's good news, and we've probably got a lot to learn from him. So we'll come back to that in due course. So, Liz, would you like to go? No, actually, you were the next, weren't you? So you like to go now?
Sure, that's fine. So my name is Liz. I'm going to start with an apology. I had COVID 2 weeks ago, and my voice is still very sore. So sorry about that. As has already been said, I grew up in South London, very, very non-farming background, very urban area. No family links to farming or anything like that. I sort of fell into agriculture by chance. Bit of a chance encounter on holiday when I was about 13. I sort of started lambing, and that's kind of how I got into it. Managed to find some really great people to sort of mentor me and sort of guide me on my journey, who pointed me towards Harper. So I've ended up doing a degree in agriculture, and then through Harper I've managed to secure funding and scholarships from various organisations which have sort of helped me on my journey, I guess. So that's probably my biggest challenge is coming from my non-farming background, but also the biggest benefit as well in some ways, because I've had no preconceived ideas as to how things should be done. I'm sort of starting from scratch, and I guess sometimes I bring in slightly unconventional views on things. But yeah, I think that's it comes with its challenges, and sometimes it's difficult for me to find people to take me seriously, I guess. A lot of people moving to uni just said, oh, you're from London, you don't know anything, you're a townie, and sort of look down on me in some ways. So it's been difficult sometimes to sort of get past that stigma, but I think I'm kind of getting there, and I've met some really great people, and I've got some really great mentors and connections. So yeah, that's sort of me.
Thank you very much. And if people are saying you don't know anything about anything because you're in London, and there are 9 million people in London, and that's a market for most farmers in this country, I would have thought that was a pretty short-sighted view, don't you? Liz, would you like to say a few words now, please?
Absolutely. So I'm Liz King, and as David mentioned, I'm a project officer with the Prince's Countryside Fund. So with my role, I'm looking at a lot of our sort of new and developing programmes, which fortunately focuses on some of the work we're doing with young people and also around natural capital. As David had also mentioned, I grew up on a family farm down in Somerset, which is where you'll find my brother today. He runs sort of 600 sheep. It's a one-man band. So I'm quite familiar with the sort of hands-on challenges. It's a rented farm with sort of multiple landlords. So it's not... it's a family farm, but it's not sort of all been handed to him on a plate then. So I'm aware of the hard work that goes into it, and that's sort of what brings a lot of the passion and enthusiasm to trying to support this group of people.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll do all this sitting down, don't you? I think all this bouncing up and down is going to be a bit of a challenge. So we'll stay here. And what I wanted to do was start off by asking you in turn where you see the opportunities really for young people and new entrants in agriculture. You've all been through a different route. You've all had your own reasons for coming into it. But what do you think for other people? And bear in mind that we're continuing our research, and we consider that this event is also part of the research that I mentioned earlier on that we're pulling together for a report that we want to produce in the autumn. So opportunities for young people and new entrants into agriculture. Why don't you start us off, Liz?
One thing that sort of struck us whilst we've been going through this process of speaking to a lot of young people is the challenges of access to land and access to finance have been really prevalent, and they've sort of played a part in most people's stories. But one of the sort of unexpected opportunities then was the number of young people who are employed as farm managers, either with estates or, sort of larger farm businesses. And I thought actually that's a really interesting way to become, have a position of leadership and a position of responsibility and get to decide how you're farming is to farm through employment. And, you know, people have achieved sort of managing up to sort of 1,200 acres within their 20s, which I think is a fantastic achievement. And it's a really good opportunity if you are from completely outside of the sector. I mean, in terms of the new enthusiasm for using less chemicals, you know, a lot of arable farms are now using sheep to graze their winter cereals, which I think has been fantastic. And possibly, is there an opportunity there for young people to become contract graziers rather than having to look for long-term tenancies and things like that potentially? So that's two opportunities to start us off, but I'm more than happy to chip in again later.
Thank you very much. And a question that I'd like to ask you in return is, if you do have a job on somebody else's farm or in an agri-business or something else, how do you actually manage to use that to build up a track record that you could show a bank manager if you actually were to have the opportunity of acquiring land in the future? So in the report that we did in 2013, we talked about actually trying to have your own balance sheet, your own P&L account operating within the business that you're working in. Do you think that there are ways that you can prove yourself when you're working for somebody else if you're then going to go in and ask a bank manager for money?
I think certainly there's an opportunity to show the impact that you've had. So obviously, if you have good data sets and good records to start with, track through your decisions and collect the information and evaluate it as you go along, I think it shows that you are, you know, conscious of your decision making, you're thinking it through, you can see measurable impacts that you've had, and I think that can contribute to give bank managers confidence in your processes. And obviously, a lot of the skills that you'll pick up whilst working for somebody else will help you when you're preparing your own business plan and things like that, I think. So I think it's possible to collect skills and experiences along the way.
That's great, and we might come back to talking about qualifications in later on. So the same question really about opportunities for young people and for other ways in to the other Liz.
So I think we're about to see a really big period of change in agriculture for many reasons. I mean, there's obviously an ageing farming population anyway, and that presents its own challenges. I think in terms of traditionally like taking on your own tenant farm and that being the way of you getting into farming, I think that might change. I think it's so difficult to get hands on land now. I don't necessarily see people rushing in and grabbing a tenancy straight away, for example. I think perhaps more likely working for other people for a lot longer, maybe never even securing your own land in that sense. But then taking ownership of your own business doesn't necessarily mean securing your own land, I guess. If you're, for example, running sheep on arable land, you're going to be moving around all the time. You've just got to move where the opportunities come to, I guess. I think I'm kind of done with that point, to be honest.
How easy is it to build a business if you're moving all the time? You haven't got your buildings anywhere. You're always travelling. You've probably the cost of fuel at the moment and everything else. How easy really is it to do it that way, do you think?
Well, I guess it entirely depends on what kind of business you're running. But I think a lot of the sort of regen ag stuff like we're seeing here, you're going to be, if you're bringing sheep on arable land, you're not going to be on the same blocks of land, you know, for years at a time, really. But you could be, you know, within a similar area or working across several different farms, but obviously moving across different bits of the farm, if that makes sense. So maybe not necessarily moving long distances away, but perhaps not being based, you know, solely saying, right, that land is now permanent pasture and I'm going to keep my sheep there and I'm just going to stay there. Perhaps it'll be a bit more mobile.
Do you think you have the confidence in electric fencing a long way away from you rather than permanent? Because a number of the arable farms aren't particularly well fenced, are they?
I think there's a lot of innovation going on. No, they're not particularly well fenced, and fencing obviously would be one of the major costs in setting up a system like that. But I think there's also a lot of technology being developed. There's always sort of cameras and things like that which work as long as you've got phone signal and things like that. So again, that presents other challenges being in rural areas because maybe you won't have phone signal and you can't get Wi-Fi and you can't connect things up. But that's almost a sort of separate issue, I guess, in some ways.
I've heard the price of cow collars, and it's pretty frightening, isn't it? Yeah. Chris, over to you. What your views?
I think I drew the short straw there because I've just got to echo basically what both Liz's said. There are a lot of opportunities to go and work for people. And also, like Liz said at the start, there's a lot more of the arable farms that want sheep on them, and they want contract shepherds. They want you to come in, bring sheep in, and graze them for certain periods of time. But the problems you face is what you do with those sheep, because there's set dates that they want them on and off. So you might suddenly end up bringing home a lot of sheep in March, and if you haven't got a home to bring them to, that's where you struggle. So you really, from my point of view, is trying to like make those sort of things work. But I do think there are opportunities if you go out and hunt them. Like I said, we did genuinely start from scratch, and that means a 2-acre bit of grass. We'd go and fence it and put sheep on it, and we'd go and water it, and we'd done it the hard way. And I think if you never say no to anything, you never know where that opportunity is going to lead you. So you've really got to put yourself out there. If you see grass out in the field, go and knock on a door, go and find out what's going on, because you just don't know what door that's going to open for you further down the line. But the new stuff, like you're saying about the arable farms taking on sheep and wanting sheep in their rotations, that is going to be a big thing coming forward, and is already a big thing, and that does open doors for people. So,
thanks very much. And what about people who've made their money elsewhere, bought into the countryside, got a house, got some land, don't know what to do with it, don't necessarily want to charge you a rent, but they just want someone to graze it off? Is that an opportunity? Yeah,
definitely. In fact, a lot of our land, we're over in Kent, and it's just we're 40-minute drive into London. So we have a lot of that. People selling up houses in London, buying a big house with 20 acres, don't know what to do with it, want to look at some sheep out in the garden for the kids and stuff like that. And we actually pick up a lot of land that way. But again, yeah, it's down to rent, sometimes just a land for the freezer and things like that. But I mean, they're getting expensive now.
So for that, you've got to have pretty sheep, I suppose.
Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
The second question is just to ask you about the support that new entrants need. Obviously, our report talked about land and finance. So, there's government policies, there's banks and funding, there are charitable supports as well. There may be some people in the supply chain that want to encourage new entrants to supply them as well. If you let me know what you think are the most important bits of support, and whether you've had any surprising support, or where you've managed to get your support from in your journey. And so that you're not left at the end, I'm going to ask you first, okay?
The support's really lacking, actually. I feel like if someone had given me a big loan on my first year of farming, I wouldn't have been able to do a lot with it. I probably would have bought all the things I didn't need to buy. But 6, 7, 8 years down the line, now's when we really need some funding. I could really do with, I think government should do a lot more to get people into farming, as we do genuinely feed the nation, and it should be a really important role, and they should do a lot more. But I also feel like banks, even if there was like a government-backed loan that you could get after 5, 6 years of farming, that, like I said, we could really do a big cash injection now, and we really would get away. But it's trying to get that funding. It's near on impossible. Even things like with the price of everything going up, we're going to want 200, 300 replacement sheep this year because we cull out a load. But we try and run those cull ewes on later. So there's a big gap between we'd have it in sheep, the money, but we can't free up the cash. So we've got a big gap between needing to buy them then and not getting the cash. Even if it was a big overdraft of 4 months, it'd be enough. But there's no specific fund that we can get hold of. If we could get a lump of money for 4 or 5 months in the autumn, it'd mean a great deal for us as a business. And it really would be the difference between us making it and not, because a lot of the time we're really on that line. So.
Can you say anything about the difference between a loan and a grant? I mean, a lot of people have hoped for grants over the years, but the discipline of having a loan and having to pay it back, some people say that teaches you more. Have you got a view on that at all?
Definitely. Some of the grants, like we got a grant for a handling system this year. I only applied because I couldn't believe some of the big companies that were applying and getting them. And I felt like, not that we deserved it more, but it would mean more to us to be able to get something like that. So I don't think the grants are a way forward. It'd probably, like you say, you still need to work at these things. You can easily pay a loan back. Once you've got some livestock and you're getting away, you can do it. So it's just literally, if a bank would come to see me, I could talk them through it, but there's no one like that. There's no, and it's the most frustrating part, and I find it really frustrating because it may be a point that we genuinely sink in the next couple of years if it were not for literally a loan for 5-6 months. But no, you can easily you can pay him back the loan. It's not, as long as you're not silly, obviously. I won't buy a new truck.
Liz, your views on support?
I might end up going off on a bit of a tangent here, but so I've had quite a lot of support through various people at Harper, mainly sort of, I guess, charity type grants and scholarships and things like that, which have helped me pay for like tractor tests, telehandler tests, all that kind of stuff, which is more sort of hands-on experience, which has been obviously really good for me. And my journey's been quite a lot different to Chris's, for example, because I've gone off to uni and gone down, I guess, the more sort of academic route. But I think in terms of actually getting young people into farming, I think the roots of this issue are way further back, and it's more about education. You know, when I was in school and I told people that I wanted to go and study agriculture and get into farming, they all thought I was absolutely bonkers and thought, well, why would you do that? It's never sort of pushed or taught as something that you can actually do. And I think that's where a lot of the roots of the issue of perhaps not being able to bring young people into agriculture sort of start. And then obviously once you're in, if you're wanting to start your own business, as Chris has already said, it can be difficult and it presents its own challenges. But I guess it's different if you're wanting to go off on your own and start your own business versus working for someone else, for example. I guess it just depends on what kind of agriculture you're doing and what kind of route you're going on. But yeah, I think the issue sort of starts a lot earlier, and you know, most kids have no idea where the food on their plate comes from. They perhaps wouldn't associate chicken on a plate to chicken like wandering around a farmyard or whatever. So I think that's where it's sort of lacking in some ways. People aren't really presented with agriculture as an option to actually go and do and take it seriously. And I think that's sort of part of the start of the problem, really.
We're told that the sort of thing that attracts people to think about agriculture is technology and innovation and gizmos and toys and all that sort of stuff that you can do these days in agriculture. Do you think that's true? Do you think that that is likely to attract people? I mean, sometimes, if you're working on a farm these days, you're sitting on a whole bundle of money on a machine with a lot of technology that you probably wouldn't hardly have dreamed of before. So my first question is, does that make a difference? And the second question is, it's such a huge challenge to look at school children across the whole country, and you look at the number of teachers, careers advisors and things that you would have to convince that how do we even begin to start that? So 2 questions, the technology one and the scale of the problem.
Okay, I'll start with technology then, because it's definitely a lot easier than your second question. I think technology, people always find it really exciting. You're going to perhaps bring in a slightly different type of person if you're pushing for sort of high-tech type jobs and drones and all kinds of different things that you can have going on farm, and perhaps a slightly more high skill set, I guess. So it's a different type of job. And I think, you'll attract different types of people, and people definitely do find it exciting. There's definitely a lot of people, I guess, get put off agriculture thinking, oh, I'm just going to be in the mud day in, day out in the rain. And the use of technology, I think it can help with that. But I guess, you're just sort of attracting a different type of audience, I guess. And in terms of how you're actually going to push agriculture in schools and things, it's definitely an uphill battle. I don't think I've really got the answers for that, but I think it's got to start way, way earlier, like primary school, rather than pushing at career advisor stage. Because if you don't understand the basic principles as to what farming means and why you do it and how you produce the food that you eat, you're never really going to be interested in it later on in life when you're thinking about a career.
I'm aware of a farm that I'm involved with, which had some big tractors. And I went to visit it with my wife, and she said, could she come up in the tractor? And the said, well, you have to take your shoes off first. And so for him, it was an office rather than an outdoor job. So perhaps that gets you a different sort of person if you're interested in the technology.
Yeah, I've definitely known guys that are like that, and they'll bring their little brush out and sweep all the crumbs off.
Yeah. I'm sure you all do that. Liz, over to you.
I think it's quite important that I think what Chris's and Liz's answers have sort of demonstrated already is that one size really doesn't fit all with the support that's needed. So, I mean, at home on the farm, we received a similar grant to Chris, I assume, for a wrapper handling system for the sheep. And that has, completely transformed what you're able to do in a day, what you're able to do, essentially safely, quickly, and what you can achieve. So, I mean, things like that are fantastic. Having said that, you had to be a BPS recipient to be eligible for the grant, which automatically rules out a lot of the sort of young people or new entrants who we have spoken to during this work. I mean, I live in Pembrokeshire, and I'm a member of Pembrokeshire Young Farmers, and through Wales YFC, Dumbia offer a lamb incentive where young people are paid a small premium on their lambs that they send through them. So if you're a registered young farmer, you send in your membership number when you send your lambs to the abattoir, and you get an extra £1, per carcass then that comes back. And actually, it's quite a nice. It's not a huge volume of money at all, but it is an encouragement, and it is supporting the young farmer, and it supports that point earlier, David, where you say where you're accruing your own balance sheet. So there are, some schemes like that which are running, and it would be interesting to see that running more broadly across the sort of supply chain and with other retailers or processors. So that would be quite an interesting thing, I think, to support a livestock farmer. I think what Liz mentioned is really interesting about education. And I think the space for government support does extend beyond the intervention of DEFRA. And I think actually agriculture can be included in education without it having to be its own topic. It can be a fantastic case study for a lot of different subjects. So whether you're, really into geography or science or design technology, you can find an area of agriculture which it applies to. So I think that would be a fantastic way to sort of support the idea of agriculture and begin to sort of level up how people outside of the industry might consider it as a career choice. So I think that's a few different ways that the support can come in without it being necessarily a huge financial commitment.
I've got a question to ask you, and maybe the other two might have a view as well. But the question about being disqualified for being able to go into a scheme or do something because you're not a BPS recipient. So, this sort of inadvertent disqualification that happens for young farmers sometimes because the rules are made in a particular way. That's obviously the sort of point that needs to be lobbied on and brought to the attention of the people that make the rules. Who really does that for new entrants? There's a lot of people in the room here. There's you here. Who do you think, there are obviously representative organisations and they do their job, but obviously new entrants isn't top of their list, their members is top of their list. In what way do young farmers have a role? They don't seem to have a structure that can necessarily lobby. Do you think that young farmers are getting shortchanged because there isn't really anybody fighting the battle for new entrants?
I think potentially, there's not one representative body for all young people in farming. Having said that, the NFYFC, the National Federation of Young Farmers, do some fantastic work, and they do certainly represent young people and their interests on a lot of different committees. And I don't necessarily think that every young person who's involved in agriculture will be a member of Young Farmers, and I don't really think it's always the role of young farmers to fight those battles, because it is a social organisation, albeit with its roots in agriculture.
Very social sometimes.
Absolutely. I've enjoyed my time greatly. I think other organisations, the NFU have got a next generation group, which is encouraging younger people to become involved in that sort of advocacy and taking those issues forward. So I think really the role sits with everybody, because we all need to do our little bit of raising awareness. We have the fantastic platform of social medias, Twitter, and if we do want to raise those issues, we can do it directly through those sources, which is possibly something that's available to us now, which hasn't been previously.
Absolutely. Chris, have you got...
I was just going to say that we actually couldn't apply for the grant because of the BPS thing. Ours was actually a separate grant to get our wrapper handling system that was from the National Lottery that were doing some work on the land locally. It's like restorative work. So, that was highly frustrating for us. The same thing,
And therefore, I mean, who would you turn to? Who do you think should do the lobbying for you in that sort of situation?
I don't know. I really don't know the answer to that. But that's what I mean. It's like frustration at every step. There's not like an easy way in to do anything. It seems like everything. Oh, we could apply for that. Oh, we can't because of that. Oh, we could do it. We can't because of that. Even it's frustrating.
Sure. Have you got any thoughts on that?
I don't have too much to add, but I guess I would just say, although obviously this talk is about young people in farming, we could also think about encouraging older people into farming who just come from different industries and things. So I think that also should be considered. It's not necessarily just young people in farming, just anyone else that might be interested in farming.
Okay. And finally, a question on how can new entrants with no existing links to agriculture be encouraged? So quite often you find you're talking about new entrants, and the new entrants is perhaps a second child of a farming family, so they already have the background. So if you're coming in completely from outside, what help or extra help do they need? And I'll start with you, Liz, on that.
I think I've personally got really lucky with the connections that I've managed to make within the industry, which I guess was sort of by chance, really. I found some really great people to work with who have taken the time and explained things to me right from the very start. And, I found a really helpful farmer who's taught me how to drive a tractor, and I ring him up occasionally when I'm doing uni work or whatever and say, what do I do here? What would you do? So I think mentorship is definitely key to it. And, I guess that sort of helped me feel like I've got my own little mini community of people around me who I can turn to if I need help. So that's definitely been a big part of it for me. And then, as I've already mentioned, education, just awareness that you can actually go into agriculture and farming and that there is a future to it. I think quite often there's a lot of bleakness in the media and a lot of people that like to complain, but there are opportunities out there if you go and find them. It just might be hard work to get them, but they're definitely out there.
Okay, and in a couple of minutes' time, I'm going to come to the audience to see what questions you might have, so you might start thinking about those if you have got something you'd like to ask. So, Liz, from outside the industry, what help do they need?
I think if you're outside of the industry, farmers inside of the industry maybe need to give you a reason to look in, because if all you see is the media's perception, then you're probably not going to want to come into agriculture. So I think there's a role for farmers to be our own advocates, and to sort of present, what actually happens on farms through your, any channels that you do have. So I think that's quite an important thing to do. I think there's... this is where I think more the role of young farmers can come in, and get in. It has the strapline of you don't have to be a farmer to be one. And that's really good because it just encourages people to come along, have a go, and it presents sort of friendly face for farming. So I do think that's another good way to encourage people to come into agriculture. But I think earlier, the same points from the previous question almost apply, in so much as, if agriculture is presented through the curriculum as case studies and things like that, it just sparks that interest for people. So that's my sort of views, I think.
Chris?
I think you've got to get people in schools teaching kids. I don't think people actually understand where their food comes from at all. I think there's the biggest disconnect we've ever had as a species about where our food comes from or how it's produced, and there's a lot of personal gratification in producing something, and I feel like if people felt that a little bit more, it might G them up into finding these things interesting. Like you were saying earlier, you know, not understanding where chickens come from, not even understanding how a loaf of bread's made, just the very, very basics. It's got to start young.
And finally, before we bring the audience in, what about accommodation? If you come from a farming family and you're living in a family farm, you're probably okay. But if you're trying to run your farm as a new entrant, with the price of housing and the shortage of housing and the price of rents, any comment on housing, just quickly, Liz?
I think it sort of brings up a much more general issue, not just housing, but the state of life right now. I guess everything's very expensive, and people aren't feeling like they're getting paid enough to live, really. And I think, agriculture is no different to any other industry in that the cost of living crisis is pinching. And I think historically, perhaps farmers have been slightly reliant on quite cheap labour, because a lot of people, you know, if you've got a family farm, you might have family that are going to work for next to nothing because, you know, they get a house to live in and things like that. So it comes with its own benefits in some ways. But I think things will have to change in agriculture to a certain extent. I think, you know, sometimes standard of work on farm, not necessarily because you're out in the elements the whole time, but just, you know, having access to toilets and things like that, you know, that are usable on a farm, I think will get kind of more highlighted. Just simple little things like that people could make changes just to make jobs a bit more attractive. Because, you know, if you're coming from an office and you're considering a career change into agriculture, if you can't even go to the toilet in a nice facility, it's not really very nice. So I think there's a kind of general issue with it as well. And then, accommodation. I mean, I guess a lot of farms, if you're going for sort of a farm manager job or a worker on a farm, they do quite often come with a house or a little cottage or something. So I think that is very attractive.
Absolutely. I mean, toilet within a couple of miles helps, doesn't it? Yeah. Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm 30 and live at home with my mum still, because I can't afford to buy a house. We live in a really wealthy area, fairly wealthy area in Kent, and trying to get that deposit together when we're trying to grow a business that sucks up a lot of cash is just near on impossible. We could go and rent, but we're both at that age now where we think we start going down that route, it's going to be, we're going to just carry on down that route. So, trying to get money together to buy a house when we need cash for the business is impossible.
And Liz, finally from you.
Absolutely. I think the cost of rural housing is really, really a squeeze for new entrants and young people working in agriculture. And particularly, as you sort of mentioned earlier, David, as people are, you know, choosing the lifestyle to live in the country and have, you know, these fantastic homes, it does unfortunately mean that a lot of the housing in rural areas is now unattainable for those people who are living and working in that area.
I thought as much. Okay. So now I wonder if any of you would like to ask questions that we can pass to the panel. I think there's a roving mic coming. There's a couple of people here. First lady there with the green top.
Hello. Thank you for that. That was very interesting. I'm here on behalf of the Land Workers Alliance, and we do advocacy for new entrants. We do a lot of campaigning around access to land and also the issues around planning, the planning system, how difficult it is to get into farming. I'm a new entrant farmer myself, went to agricultural college when I was 18, and now I have a piece of land that I farm profitably myself as well. So I'm very, very aware of this journey and how many barriers there are. The access to land, the access to good markets, the access to somewhere to live, all of these things. And I think it's great that it's being addressed here, and it's such a big issue. But we kind of need to do something about the food system. The price of food hasn't moved. I don't think we have a cost of living crisis, or it's not the cost of food that hasn't shifted. So I think we need to do something to get more young people into farming. I didn't come from a farming background, so I just wonder if these people, your panel, would like to perhaps get a little bit more political, come in and get involved in the Land Workers Alliance, because we campaign on all of this stuff so much, and it'd be great to have your energy and enthusiasm to come and join us.
So it's a sort of invitation rather than a question, I think, isn't it?
The question is, why are you not already members of the Land Workers Alliance if you are not? That's the question.
You can think about that and maybe talk about that afterwards. But there's an offer, and I suspect there are others too. John.
John de Ramsey. I'm a farmer from Cambridgeshire. I'm delighted with the tenor of the conversation, really good news, because I live in a village where 120 years ago there were 400 jobs in agriculture. There are now 18. Now, that's not because we're not employing people, it's because of mechanisation, and we need to replace that in that society. Because what we've now got is a totally urban society. I have people who visit the farm, and you explain to them that, yes, their hens do lay eggs and cows do give milk, but the cow has to have a calf first. What? Are you sure about that? And you say, well, have you got children of your own? Perhaps that's a bit of a clue about milk, you know. And so we've got this enormous gap that we need to fill, and it comes right from the schools. I'm sure you're right, starting right at the beginning, and the disconnection there is between urban and natural is bad too. I mean, one of the disconnections is, for instance, they've discovered in hospitals, if they put someone who's recovering with a view over a tree, they recover more quickly than if it's a brick wall. I mean, there's really simple things, those connections that we've lost, and we need to get it back in schools, firstly, and secondly, visits to farms. I have visits to farms, and they are teaching the child, the teacher, and the parent have no idea. So we must get it more into schools, and I know the NFU are doing that. So therefore, I would ask for educational grants. I mean, I'm not a great supporter of grants because on the whole, an industry is best is when it actually gets itself going on its own. But actually, a grant to start it, one of those first grants, just to get things going, it makes all the difference. And currently, if we're going to talk about opportunity, you've never had interest rates lower. You've never had tenancies more flexible. And there really are opportunities out there for young people with new ideas. I've got one neighbour who grows a big chunk of sweet corn for Sainsbury's. He did that all on his own, doesn't own an acre. He rents fields. Not the same field every year, obviously. So there are opportunities, but we do need that educational push.
Do you have a primary school in the village?
We do have a primary school in the village.
And are they on it?
No, they're not. I've got them planting trees at the moment, and each child has a tree, and the battle of getting them to remember to water it and so on.
Did any of you go on visits to farms early on in your career that gave you any sort of feeling that you wanted to do this, or did you know it already? No,
didn't go on a single farm visit. Never presented as an option.
Either of you two?
Well, I was born on a farm.
Yeah,
but I don't know what's going on with kids now, and I just completely agree with the disconnect from food. I think that's where it all starts. Like, people don't know where food comes from or how you produce anything, even the basics like an egg. Like.
Yeah.
David, there was just one thing, which was we advertised for a tractor driver about 6 years ago, got 6 replies, and then we rejigged it, including a whole lot of satellite steering, computer work, etc., and we got 120 replies.
Yeah. Well, that was a bit what we were talking about, wasn't it? Did you go on a farm?
I was quite fortunate. I obviously grew up on a farm, so we didn't have a school trip. But obviously there is the work which Leaf does in their sort of FaceTime a Farmer campaign, where classes are able to FaceTime a farmer, and it really kicked off during the sort of pandemic. So even though it wasn't a physical trip to the farm, I think there is a growing sort of connection through that work with primary schools. So I think it is coming. I just think we need to be a little bit optimistic about it.
And you don't really want to FaceTime a grumpy farmer, do you? Any other questions? Two questions next to each other back there. The one on the right, the lady first. At the back in the middle.
Hi, I'm Danielle from FarmEd. I presume most of us are aware of the WIFing scheme, which is obviously that volunteering on a farm. In order for more people to get into farming, especially young people, you know, everyone's looking for placement over summer, work experience through uni. Excuse me. Do you think WIFing should be incentivised by money from the government? Because I know you mentioned that there's a potential pot of money that is locked up. If there's one grant or one scheme that the government could get into, do you think incentivised WIFing would be the best option amongst many?
Chris?
No, it sounds like a good idea. Personally, I wouldn't have someone... We're not in a position to be able to spend time trying to teach people about farming just where we are right now. But if someone was to pay me for someone to come out for a day, I'm all for it. So, could work.
Yeah, Liz?
Absolutely. A lot of the sort of people we've spoken to through doing this research have expressed an interest in having people to come to their farm for work experience, but they feel that at the moment they don't have the sort of time capacity or the skills to know how to sort of safely bring that person onto farm. So potentially if there was sort of funding available for it, it would give them that chance to build those skills and the sort of motivation to spend the time doing it as well. So yeah, I think it's certainly not the worst idea.
And it's the health and safety stuff that's worrying people, isn't it, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I just echo what Liz has just said, really. Building the skills and maybe teaching farmers that are sort of considering going into WIFing and things like that, teaching them how to speak to the public effectively and efficiently, and teaching things successfully, I guess, is, the kind of skills which perhaps could be built upon.
Okay, so mixed views there. Another question? Yes.
Hi, Russ Carrington from the NEP Regen Farms. I was wondering what the panel thought about the need for us to now farm more in tune with nature and to deliver other public services, and therefore what that means in terms of upskilling on ecology and other scientific elements to how we can measure performance and improvement and regeneration on our farms.
Okay, Liz, got a thought on that? Or do you want to pass it for the moment?
Maybe I'll pass it for a minute.
Chris?
Yeah, I think it's great. I was going to say, I just lost it. Then, sorry, I was going to say, that's why I'm here today. That's why I've come here to learn from people that are doing all that sort of stuff, and I find it very fascinating. And I think a lot of people will as well find this whole regen movement really a big thing. And I just wish we could sell it a bit better to the public. That's the only thing I find frustrating, especially if our production's going to go lower. We've got to be able to sell it a lot better than we do. So probably a bit off piece, wasn't it?
No, that's fine. Yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, I do actually think that the all the changes which are happening in agriculture at the moment are what makes it so exciting and means there is such a broad range of opportunities for new entrants and young people coming into agriculture, because a lot of people, once you've established a pattern of how you're farming, you are more reticent to change. Whereas for young people and new entrants, learning this way of farming and regenerative principles and, farming without the reliance on chemicals and such like, it does mean that actually you're really well suited for the opportunities which are going to come up in the future. So I do think actually, whilst it's a challenge, it does make an exciting opportunity.
And I think it probably also brings in another cohort of people into farming that maybe might not have thought about it before. Other questions? Several here. Yes, please, in the middle.
Hello. So this is probably going to be a slightly unpopular opinion in some things, but I think it's true. We need to encourage as many young people into farming as we can. We also need to accept that, realistic with life, a lot of those people won't end up running their own farming business. Like, success isn't mandatory. And I mean, 12 years ago, I decided I want to farm sheep. So I went to my bank and I got a personal loan for 10 grand. And I went and bought 100 sheep. And 12 years further on now, we farm 6,000 ewes, 2,000 that I own. The rest are in partnership. We contract farm 700 cattle. We run a contracting and consultancy business and employ a few people. And that's spread across 3 counties. And the only owned ground I've got is 4 acres that's in Wales that I rent free to some other new entrants in Wales because there's a barn on it and some nice ground. And I live in a semi-detached house in a village that I have to pay £1,500 a month for because it's got a big enough garden to put my kennel with 15 dogs. And I spend half my life on the road, tarmac farming, driving around the countryside. And it's hard. It's really hard. But then that's how you filter the best people out. And our industry needs to be made up of the best people, not just anybody that wants to have a go. And I think there should be a place for everybody, but a lot of these kind of conversations about how do we end up owning a farm? How do we end up with a 10-year tenancy with a farmhouse and all that stuff? Where are all the workers going to come from? You know, there are so many progressive farming businesses all around the country that are crying out for staff, can't get staff, and that there are so many young people desperate to get into farming. And I've been to so many farms where we do the contract work that are just like, staff are coming, staff are going, and they're not going because of the farm's fault. They're just not suited to it. And I think it's right. We should encourage a lot of young people into farming. But we also have to accept that it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You know, like lots of people will not make it. You know, survival isn't mandatory, and it is tough. And that's the nature of the industry. And we kind of live in a world these days where everyone feels like if they want to do something, they should just have the right and just be allowed to. And unfortunately, that's never been the case. There have always been people that will succeed and filter to the top. And it's a bit like we breed rams and breed a lot of sheep, and it's about selection under pressure. And you find the best in your population by applying pressure and selecting them accordingly.
Okay.
And I know that's slightly unpopular kind of opinion.
Well, interested to know what the panel think. I mean, you don't, if you go into production engineering, you don't want a factory on day one, do you necessarily?
No.
So,
Sorry, I think you're right, pretty much to an extent. Like I said, if I was given a lump of money on my day one of farming, I would have spent it very, very differently to how I would now. And yeah, it takes a fair lot of want to do it. You know, you don't earn any money the first few years. You just won't earn any money, and it takes a lot of. You really got to love it, or really have a passion, and to go that extra 9 yards to do it and not give up. So, yeah, it's fairly.
Yeah. Any extra thoughts to that, either of you two?
I think on from that, I mean, you've already said about the difficulty in finding good staff, but I think also to a certain extent it's hard for good staff to find good farms to work for. And I think putting in place, you know, a progression kind of, if someone can come onto a farm and see where their career could go within the next 5 years, I think that's how you're going to attract and keep the good talent. You've already said that you're renting for free some of the land that you own to people that work for you. So you're already kind of showing how, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. It's that kind of getting that balance between sort of helping people in whatever way you can as an employer. And I think that will attract the right kind of people into your business.
Okay. I've got somebody for a question in the front. 2, 3, 4. Let's, with time being so short, let's take all 4 questions and then we'll deal with them all. Okay.
Firstly, a provocative thing is that woofers, I think, is for middle class people who can afford to work for nothing, and that's tragically, I think, the case. If you're off a council estate, and your parents can't afford you to do whatever, you won't get there. But the main thing I wanted to say was about housing, and I worked as a town planner for 5 years, and if you rent some ground off a farmer, you run a horticultural unit, and you establish the need for a dwelling on that area. The dwelling is consented. The dwelling goes with the land. The farmer chucks you out. They flog it with consent. My suggestion is that we should potentially give personal consents to people who have established those type of businesses, so they can then take that consent and put it on land that they have purchased, so they can actually have, you know, a site to develop themselves.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's pick up the other 3 questions that I've got here, so that we can just try and answer 1 or 2 of them at the end.
Hi there. I'm just wondering what you think about the sort of role of social media in educating, you know, people that aren't from an agricultural background, and also encouraging new entrants. Do you think, you know, more farmers should be on social media and?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, social media question.
My question is, how do you educate Mr. Farmer that there is a problem and how to sort it? This time 7 years ago, I had to ring up 30 farmers just to get voluntary work before the 31st finally accepted me. I've just finished university. All of us have got jobs apart from 2. One is from Africa and one is from Egypt. I wouldn't like to draw a correlation, but how do we educate farmers to accept all sorts of people into the industry and give them a chance?
Okay, diversity question for whoever wants. And then, one at the back there, or two at the back.
I was just going to say I really agree with the educational curriculum point of view that it needs to start from schools because, I was just absolutely the same for me. I had no idea that farming was even an option and it's not really sold as an attractive career. And I think a really good way of doing it is, teaching where food comes from, but ecology and like the sort of climate change is probably a really good way of doing it because that's something that young people are really aware of and interested in. And if we can sell farming as a tool within that toolbox of addressing those issues, and that if it can be educating that way, then that might make young people more aware that that's an attractive career and an option. But my question was going to be to Liz about whether she had any challenges or maybe opportunities as a woman new entrant.
Okay, I think we've got 3 questions I want to pick up, and we probably haven't got time for any more, I'm afraid. You're welcome to talk to the panel afterwards. But there was a social media one, and a diversity one, and a women in agriculture one. So I don't know if you'd like to take one each, and I suggest that one of the women takes the women in agriculture one. Do you want to take that one first?
Well, I was actually going to touch on the diversity one because I'm currently doing my dissertation research on diversity and inclusivity policies within the food supply chain. And I have found it so difficult just to get responses from people. So I'm trying to get answers from people all across the food supply chain, not just farmers. And to be perfectly honest, I was expecting supermarkets and retailers to be a lot more open-minded about that kind of research. And I've just got absolutely nowhere. It's like been banging my head against a brick wall. So it's definitely a massive issue. I think diversity in general, there's so many benefits from having a diverse workforce, from all kinds of diversity, not just ethnic diversity, all kinds of diversity, especially, gender diversity as well, that's already been mentioned. It's definitely a big issue. I don't really have the answers as to how to kind of get around that. There's a lot of different parts to it. Come and find me later if you want to chat more about it. But yeah.
What I would say is I remember talking to a taxi driver in Exeter, and he was from an immigrant family, and I asked him about agriculture, and he said, I've come to this country to get away from agriculture because I see it as not being me being ambitious for my future. Some of the similar things. Do you want to take the women in agriculture?
Absolutely. So when I finished uni in 2015, I moved to Pembrokeshire and began working with dairy farmers. And I think the biggest thing that surprised me was, you went on farm and you had that real feeling of like, what are you doing here then? But I would say thankfully since then, there's fantastic groups. There's women in agriculture, there's women in dairy. There are, a number of organisations who are really trying and representing women positively within the industry. I think in 2015 I went to a conference and there were 2 women there, and I went to the same conference last year and it was, there were 30 women there. So it's, it definitely is becoming much easier for women to be involved in agriculture, but I think that's thanks to positive role models and the advocacy that they're doing.
Thank you. And just finally, social media from you?
I think every farmer should get on social media and sell yourselves. Social media is actually, farming is actually a very interesting subject, and you'd be amazed at the amount of people that would find it interesting. Just look at, I know it's not social media as such, but Clarkson's Farm, the success that has come from that. I was at a barbecue last weekend with an Australian girl who was just like, I never knew anything until I watched it, and he's so engaging and stuff like that. So I would 100% say go for it. Just be very aware that people henpecking each other within the industry about how you show farming, because there's 1,000 different ways to do 1,000 different things. So just show your own story, be true, and you'll be amazed the amount of people that find it fascinating.
Thank you. And Clarkson, of course, brilliant to talk to him, but he has got a bit more money than some other people. It makes it slightly easier, but he's entertaining. Anybody that is interested in the Farm Resilience Programme that the PCF, the Prince's Countryside Fund, runs, do come and see some of the team up here afterwards. I think it just remains for me to thank my panel very much. Incredibly informative, interesting personal stories for all of you. So thank you very much indeed.